Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to talk about headstand. So this is a yoga practice and a tutorial specifically for beginners. So whether you are newer to headstand, you've never done it before but you've always wanted to, or whether you've been to a yoga class where headstand has been suggested and you're like, I don't know, and nobody taught you, you are in the right place, okay? This is what we're gonna do. We are gonna talk about headstand and some of the fundamental actions, some of the foundational pieces that you need to be doing, and just basic alignment and placement of your body so that you can take headstand and feel more confident, more supported, more stable, and safer. So before we get started, I want to talk about something really important when it comes to headstand, which is this idea that depending on where you are within the yoga world, headstand has either been demonized or it's been sort of, just like thrown in there, as like a totally normal all the time, every day sort of a pose. Okay, so on one side, usually on the side that, favors really, really strong alignment, and a lot of precision and specificity, headstand in, recent years has been called, a pose, one of the worst poses that you can ever do, like avoid headstand at all costs. Headstand could hurt you. It could do terrible things. And again, on the other side, you have, like yoga classes that you might go to where somebody will say, hey, if headstand's in your practice, go for it. Go upside down, have fun, without any instruction or without any support or without any idea of how to get into headstand. So what I want to just say, first and foremost, is that headstand in of itself is not an inherently dangerous pose, okay? Headstand, there's nothing about headstand that could necessarily do terrible things to you. Okay, just like any pose in yoga, any pose could, be problematic, right? Any pose could be empowering. So the more you know about your body and the more you know about your pose that you're going to be taking, the better off you're going to be. And that's really the point of this tutorial. That's the point of you being here. Okay, so the thing that I do want to say before we get started is that headstand is, I think, the inversion that requires the most strength and the most skill. So I do think that there are a lot of poses that you need to be able to do really before you're able to do headstand. And I talk about that a lot in my video this month that came out this month called Best Prep Poses for Headstand. And I share 7 poses that you really should be able to do before you do headstand, okay? So make sure you go check out that video so that you can get familiar with those prep poses and can feel solid in those poses so that you feel like headstand is more possible. So now that I've said all of that, what I want to do is just give you the very, very basic alignment for a headstand and the basic ideas for it so that when you do feel ready to do a headstand, you can do it with no problem, okay? So first and foremost is the basic alignment, all right? So the things that I like to have available to me, particularly from outside on this concrete porch that I have, is I want to have a blanket for my head. You don't necessarily need that. I just like to have it out here. I don't usually use it, on wood floors with my mat, but out here on concrete, I definitely do because it's just a little bit more support and a little bit more cushion. And you might want blocks, okay? But the first thing that you need to know is the placement of your hands. And this is for the most basic version of headstand, Shirshasana 1, which is the more familiar one, where your arms are interlaced, your fingers are interlaced, and your forearms are on the ground. I'll also show you the basic alignment for Shirshasana 2, which is also commonly known as tripod headstand. But let's go basic headstand first, okay? So basic alignment, fingers are interlaced, and you're going to tuck that bottommost pinky finger in, okay? It's the bottommost pinky finger. If you interlace your fingers, okay, there's a pinky finger that would go on the bottom. You want to tuck that one in, and then you make a fist with your 2 hands. Okay, now that fist with your 2 hands, you can squeeze your hands together, and you do this before you even put your hands on the floor. If you squeeze your hands together, you should feel the insides of your arms, your biceps, wake up, okay, in a really, really big way. Okay, just do that, squeeze. Now you're not trying to get your elbows to touch. You're squeezing with resistance as though you actually can't bring your elbows any closer than about shoulder width apart. And that should create a little triangle. Okay, so between the fist of your hands and your elbows, it's a triangle shape with no bottom. Okay, so you want that triangle. The next thing that you do is once you have that triangle, you're going to put the fist of your hands and your forearms on the floor, and you want your elbows to be about underneath your shoulders, maybe a little bit ahead of your shoulders, okay? You want that to be there because if your elbows are wider apart, then you're not going to have quite as much support. And I can even feel the wider apart my elbows go, the more I start to feel a little bit of just pressure, not pain, but pressure in my neck. Okay, when my elbows are about shoulder width apart, I feel action in my shoulders, and that's where I want it. Okay, because that's where that primary support for headstand is going to be. Okay, now, after I give myself that good squeeze, I'm going to take my head. First, I'm going to slide my shoulders towards one another so I feel even more engagement in my shoulders. My chest will go down, but my belly lifts. Okay, so I'm not collapsing completely. Chest goes down, belly lifts. Then I'm going to take my head to the floor. Now for me, I'm taking my head closer to my hairline to the floor as opposed to the crown of my head. That has a lot to do with your neck. I'll talk about that in just a sec. But I'm taking my head to the floor right in between where my hairline is and the crown of my head. Okay? Now once my head is there, I'm actually going to push down a little bit as I lift my knees up. And then I can walk my feet in as close as they'll go, still pressing down through my head and my forearms. Then I tuck one knee up towards my chest and the other knee up. Okay, so I've got two knees tucked in and up. Okay, I can draw my knees together and be in what I like to call egg stand. Now this is a super great place to stay to build confidence in headstand. If you feel pretty steady here, then you can draw your knees up. So your knees go vertical right over your hips and your heels will drop down behind you. Okay, once your heels drop down behind you, you can squeeze your butt and extend your legs straight up. And those are the stages. And I'm still pressing down, especially through my forearms, a little bit through my head. And there's some wobble. You can see it if you're watching this tutorial. If you're doing it with me, you can't see it, but you probably feel it. Then I'm going to draw my knees back in so my heels come towards my butt. Knees go wide. I tuck them back in towards egg stand. Then I place one foot down, still pressing down through my forearms. Other foot down. Knees to the floor. And sit back. Okay? And that's my headstand. Okay? Now going back to the idea of where you want to place your head, more traditionally, it's instructed to place the weight on the very crown of your head. Now that just doesn't work for everybody, okay? So if your cervical spine, and that's the vertebra of your neck, are a little bit flatter, you need to actually create a little bit more curve. My cervical spine is a little bit flatter, okay? So I like to place my weight a little bit closer to the crown of my head, which gives me a little bit more of the curve in my neck, which is the natural curve of your spine, so that I have more support. Okay, if you have a healthier neck, you could be closer to the crown of your head. I recommend, like if you're not sure, talk to somebody in person, go to a yoga class, ask your yoga teacher, or, you can always just default to that place in between your hairline and the crown of your head. So you're not quite on the crown of your head, you're not on your hairline, you're somewhere in between. Okay, and you can find that spot, just like touch it on your head, and that's where you want to be. Okay? Now the other piece that's really important is just how much you're pressing down through your forearms. Okay? Like there's so much rooting down from my upper back into my forearms and a little bit through my head that enables me to hold myself up. Okay? Another key important piece here is that there's no jumping, there's no kicking. You could do a little hop, I'll show that in just a sec, but there's no like flinging yourself up into headstand. Headstand requires an enormous amount of control, an enormous amount of steadiness and intention. And I talk about that in another one of my videos this month, which is the top 3 tips for a better headstand. Okay, so you can learn a little bit more about why you don't do those there, but basically you want to pull yourself up like I showed you into egg stand and then go all the way up. Okay, so that's just from a beginner standpoint. You want to give yourself a place where you feel really connected and really stable before going all the way up into the pose. Okay, now if you can't pull yourself up, if your hips are a little bit tighter, you can give yourself a little hop. I'll show that really quickly, or you can grab blocks and I'll show that too. Okay, so Same idea, fingers are interlaced, bottommost pinky finger gets tucked in, right? That triangle of my hands goes down and I squeeze. So there's good action in my biceps. Then I'm going to place my head, again, in between my hairline and the crown of my head on the floor. And I'm still squeezing, right? So I'm pressing the heel of my hands against the back of my head, pushing down into my forearms and the fist of my hands, and I lift up. Now, if I can't pull up, I can do a little hop. Okay? So it's just like a little hop, tiny, tiny little jump. Not a big one, tiny. And I'm still tucking into egg stand as I do. Okay? Because if you give yourself too much bounce, right, you could go over, which, you know, no big deal. You could somersault, but most people don't enjoy like falling out of an inversion. So giving yourself a tiny little hop just to feel that lift is really useful. Now, if you want to learn how to pull up, but you can't quite get your hips that high, you can use blocks just to lift yourself off the floor, and you can place them at a couple of different heights. I start on the lowest height first just because it's less precarious, and what I do to get there is actually put my knees on the blocks just to start out, and then my forearms down so I can get into that place. So my butt is going to be a little higher up than usual. Head goes down, and then I put my feet on the blocks, and immediately, if you're watching, you can tell the difference between my feet on the floor and my feet on the blocks. And that just gives me a little bit more lift, right, to pull up. And like I said, you can also do that higher up. I just find that being on the lowest one, that's the one that's going to give me the absolute most feeling of confidence because it's the least precarious, right? It's the widest place for my feet. The higher up you go, right, the less foundation there is, yeah? So you can use those blocks just to give yourself a little bit of height if you need. I recommend using one for each leg, one for each foot, okay? Now, those are the basics for a pose, you know, for Shirshasana 1, which is your more basic headstand with your forearms on the floor, and that's the more traditional version of headstand. If you want to learn how to do tripod headstand, it's essentially the same thing, okay? The only difference is your hands are on the floor instead of your forearms. Okay, you get up into the pose in the same way. Okay, you could also get up from a wide-legged place, and I'll show you both. But the way that it's going to work is this. So, same idea, if I'm on my knees, I'm still going to use the blanket, but instead of putting my hands on the blanket, which is a little bit softer and squishier, I'm going to slide my hands underneath the blanket, and I'll fold it up so you can see where they are. Slide my hands to the floor, out in front of my knees. I come vertical over my wrists, and then as I bend my elbows, my head is going to come to the floor because I want to create a tripod or a triangle between my head and my two hands. Okay, much like you do here with this triangle of your fists and your elbows and your forearms, okay? So hands are on the floor, okay? Underneath my blanket. My head comes on down into that triangle. And I want my forearms to stay vertical. Shoulders go on my back. Knees go up. And it's the same thing. I'm going to pull my knee in and up. Find that tuck. I can also jump up. Do that hop. Knees go vertical. And I'm really pushing down through my hands as I extend my legs up. Okay, and I'm going to come down in the same way. Heels drop towards my butt, knees go wide. One leg, then the other. Okay? So, same way as you get up into your more basic headstand, only with your hands on the floor. Now, the reason this one's a little bit more precarious is that you only have your hands on the floor instead of your forearms. And so this one, again, it requires a lot more strength, a lot more control, and a lot more stability. And this is why, if you feel like you can do this version easily, going straight forward into it, another option is to come into this pose with wide legs. All right, so if you were going to come into this pose with wide legs, this is really if your hips are more mobile, but this is also a possibility. Hands go on the floor, okay, about as wide apart as your shoulders, elbows bend, head down. And it's the same idea. I'm going to squeeze and lift. So my legs are wide. And I'm really squeezing my forearms in, pushing down with my fingers. And then I can take my legs all the way up. Okay, legs go wide again. I'm really working my hands, really working my legs, pressing through my head to come down. Okay? So that one I feel like is a lot more accessible for people who have more mobility in their hips, for sure. It's a lot more accessible if you've done headstand before and you feel confident in headstand. So I don't necessarily think that's the beginner way to get into it, but if you've done headstand before and you just want to get really clear on the foundation, that is another option for getting up into your tripod headstand. Okay? So hopefully this has laid the foundation for you and given you some useful tools for getting into headstand as a beginner and feeling a little bit more confident, a little bit more sure of yourself, a little bit more clear. Know that you can always use the wall behind you if you absolutely need to. Know that falling out of the pose is totally fine. Know that the goal isn't necessarily to extend your legs straight up, but mostly to feel really strong and stable with your forearms and your head, or your hands and your head on the floor, right? So if you get your knees tucked in towards your chest and you're doing egg stand and that's where you want to stay, great job, right? That's fantastic. Okay, don't feel like you have to rush into this and get your legs all the way up to, do the full pose. Balancing on your head is headstand, right? No matter where your legs are. Okay, so keep that in mind too. And as always, if something doesn't feel right, if something feels funny, if your neck starts to bother you, if your head hurts, if your shoulders feel weird, if something feels off, come down, take a break, check in with your body, and just make sure that you feel like you're setting yourself up in the best possible way for headstand success. Okay? Because like I said before, this pose is not inherently dangerous. Okay? There's nothing inherently terrible about this pose. Okay? But the more you know about your body and the more conscious you are and the more aware you are of how you get into and out of it, the better off you're going to be. Okay? If you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave comments in the comments below. I would love to hear how this goes for you, checking out your headstand pose if you are brand new to it. And thanks for tuning in as always. If you really enjoyed this particular video, you're going to love all the videos that I've offered this month on headstand. You can find them on my YouTube channel. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do in the bottom right corner so that you can get videos like this all month long, all year long, whenever you want it, totally for free. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I will see you back here again really soon. Until then, bye. Did you enjoy this headstand video? If you did, and if you want more videos like this month in my online yoga studio, the Conscious Healthy Collective, and in its sister studio, the Collective Light, I am doing practices devoted to strengthening, stabilizing, and supporting headstand all month long. So if you enjoyed this class and you want to get more practices with headstand in them so that you can feel more confident in this pose, upside down, in your core, and just, doing the fun yoga that you like to do, definitely check out my online yoga studio, the Conscious Healthy Collective and the Collective Light. You can get the links for those in the comments below. And if you really enjoyed this, you can try these two studios out, one of the two, for half off this month if you type in the code HEADSTAND at checkout. So that's 50% off your first month for an entire month, just to check things out and see what you think of all these other awesome headstand poses. So I hope that I will see you on the mat in the Collective or in Light this month, rocking your headstands. And until then, I look forward to being back in the mat with you really soon. All right? Bye.